Walk into any Hugo Boss store in the world today. The suits hang in clean rows: gray, charcoal, navy. The cologne is on the counter. The leather goods behind glass. The brand feels like precision, like ambition, like success. It is one of the most recognizable luxury fashion names on earth. It was built by a Nazi. Not a man who lived through the Nazi era and made compromises. A paid member of the Nazi Party. A man who manufactured the uniforms worn by the SS, the Hitler Youth. And the Wehrmacht. A man who used forced labor, concentration camp prisoners, to run his factory, and whose company took 66 years to apologize. This is the gap between what Hugo Boss shows you and what Hugo Boss actually is. Hugo Ferdinand Boss was born in 1885 in Metzingen, a small town in Baden-Württemberg, Germany. His parents ran a linen and hosiery shop. He trained as a tailor. He served in the First World War. In 1924, he opened his own clothing manufacturing company. In the same town where he was born. For the first several years, the business struggled. Germany in the late 1920s and early 1930s was economically devastated. The hyperinflation of 1923, then the Great Depression. Boss came close to bankruptcy. In 1931, Hugo Boss made a decision. He joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party. The Nazi Party, his membership number was 508389. The record exists. It has always existed. What changed, eventually, was who was willing to read it aloud. His party membership opened a door. In 1934, Boss began receiving contracts to manufacture uniforms for Nazi organizations. The SS, the Hitler Youth. The NSK, the National Socialist Motor Corps. The Wehrmacht. The black uniforms. The brown shirts. The gray military dress. That would become the visual identity of the Third Reich. Hugo Boss made them. He did not make them reluctantly. He made them, expanded his factory to meet demand, and grew his business substantially on the revenue those contracts generated. The war expanded, German industrial labor became scarce. Men were conscripted. Factories across Germany faced a choice about how to meet production demands. Hugo Boss factory in Metzingen employed forced laborers, Poles, French prisoners of war, and workers from concentration camps, people who had no choice about being there, people who were not paid, people who were working under conditions of coercion, within a system designed to use them as disposable inputs. To an industrial economy. The Hugo Boss factory in Metzingen is still there today. It is now a museum, a design center, a tourist destination for people interested in fashion history. The building that once housed forced laborers now houses creative directors. The distance between those two facts is the full length of what a brand name can do to the memory of a place. Act 3. The aftermath, 4:30 to 6:30, Germany was defeated in May 1945. Hugo Boss, like thousands of Nazi party members and war profiteers, faced a denazification process. He was brought before a denazification board in 1946. He was found guilty. The specific finding: an activist and supporter of National Socialism. His punishment was a fine of 100,000 Reichsmarks and the loss of his voting rights. That was it. He was not imprisoned. His factory was not seized. His contracts, his assets, his business continued. Hugo Boss died in 1948, 2 years after the denazification tribunal. 3 years after the end of the war he had profited from. His son-in-law took over the company. His grandsons eventually ran it. The brand was built into what you see in shopping malls today. The suits, the cologne, the Formula One sponsorships, the global advertising campaigns, on a foundation that the company spent decades, hoping nobody would examine closely enough to describe plainly. Act 4, the silence, 6:30 to 8 o'clock. For most of the post-war decades, Hugo Boss said nothing. There was no public acknowledgement, no statement, no memorial in the factory, no reference in company materials. This was not unique to Hugo Boss. The reconstruction of German industry in the post-war period involved a collective agreement, informal, unspoken, but pervasive, that the past would not be discussed in ways that prevented recovery. But Hugo Boss was not a country rebuilding from rubble. It was a fashion brand selling luxury goods to people who did not know what the name on the label had meant to the men who wore black uniforms. In photographs from the 1930s, the silence was commercially rational. It was also a 66-year lie of omission, not a spoken lie, something quieter and more durable than a spoken lie. The absence of the truth, presented in a space clean enough that nobody thought to ask what had been there before. Act 5, the apology, 8 to 9:10. In 2011, Hugo Boss commissioned an independent historical study of the company's activities during the Nazi era. The study was conducted by the historian Roman Kaster. It was published. It confirmed what the records had always shown: the party membership, the SS contracts, the forced labor. The company issued a statement. They expressed, and this is a direct paraphrase of the language used, sincere apologies to those who suffered harm or hardship at the Hugo Boss factory, or were subjected to forced labor there. 2011. The war ended in 1945. 66 years, that is how long it takes for a fashion empire to apologize for the people who worked without pay, to make the uniforms of the Third Reich in a factory that is now a design museum. Close, 9:10 to 10:00. Hugo Boss today is worth approximately $4 billion. They sell suits in 127 countries. They sponsor athletes and musicians and film festivals. The brand has been successfully separated from the man. That separation is what a brand does. That is its primary function. Not to sell you a suit, but to create a space clean enough that the question of who made it and how and under what circumstances never fully arrives. This channel exists because that question deserves to arrive. Every time. Next video. The drink you have had at every celebration of your life was invented from cheese waste in Nazi Germany. The origin of Fanta is darker than the bottle. Subscribe if you want to know.